I am Liam Foster, an ordinary man, living in a noisy city, always busy and rarely having time to think about what is happening around me. But tonight, everything is going to change. I can't forget the feeling in my stomach, that indescribable feeling of guilt and anxiety, making me feel like I'm about to lose control. This is the night everything will crumble. When the doorbell rang around 11 p.m., I no longer thought of it as a mere coincidence. Everything had a reason. I had a feeling tonight would not be like the others. At that moment, I was sitting in my dimly lit apartment, with only the yellow light of a desk lamp shining on the pile of work documents. I couldn't escape the exhaustion and weariness from being unable to break free from the indifference in my relationship with Grace, my wife, whom I've been married to for 10 years. The love had long faded, and all that remained were complaints and long nights with no words exchanged. I looked up when the doorbell rang again, but this time it felt different. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. I hesitated, but eventually walked to the door, unable to stop my curiosity. Looking through the peephole, I saw 2 police officers standing at the door. An unfamiliar sensation took over me. "We are the police, Mr. Foster," the lead officer said, his tone formal. "So what?" I replied, unable to hide my anxiety. "Your wife, Grace Foster, has been involved in an incident. She's been shot and is currently in critical condition. We need you to come with us immediately." It was like being punched in the face. My mind was spinning, unsure of what to think. Just minutes ago, I was sitting in that dark room, working absent-mindedly, and now I was standing here, hearing about this like it was a story from a distant place. "My wife was shot," I repeated, my voice catching. "She's at the hospital." "We need you to clarify a few things," the officer continued. I couldn't think of anything else but to follow them to the hospital. But throughout the journey, there was only one question repeating in my mind. How did my wife get involved in a shooting like this? I will continue the story from here if you'd like. The surprise and tension were established from the start, and this is just the beginning to lead into even more suspenseful developments. As I followed the 2 officers into their car, everything around me suddenly became foggy, as if I was in a nightmare I couldn't wake up from. I didn't know how to feel: scared, angry, or even furious. All I knew was that I couldn't understand why my wife, Grace, was involved in all of this. A woman who had been with me for a decade, how could she so easily turn her back on me? When the car stopped in front of the hospital, I could feel the heaviness in the air, as if everyone knew something terrible was happening but didn't dare to speak it out loud. The officers led me inside, where doctors and nurses rushed back and forth, anxious yet trying to remain composed. I didn't have time to analyze all the emotions rising within me because everything was quickly spiraling out of my control. One of the officers turned to me, his face more serious than ever. "We need to know if you are involved in this incident," he asked, his eyes scrutinizing me as if I were a suspect. "Involved?" I asked, not believing my ears. "I just want to know where my wife is and if she's okay." There was a brief pause. The officer looked at me, his eyes as though reading every thought in my head, but still maintaining his cold demeanor. Finally, he sighed. "Your wife is in surgery. We know who shot her, but we still need to clarify a few things." "Will she survive?" I asked, and I could feel the fear I was trying to hide in each word. "Not sure. She was shot badly, but the doctors are doing their best." I felt like a heavy stone was pressing on my chest. I had never felt this exhausted and drained before. No matter how angry I was, I couldn't help but worry about her. A part of me still couldn't detach from the memories of a Grace who was once there, loving and caring for me. The officer continued with the details. She was in a hotel with a man named Tom, a prominent figure in the tech industry. His wife, Olivia, found out. He opened the door for her without suspecting anything. And then she shot both of them. I stopped breathing. The words he said were like a punch to the gut. Olivia. That was Tom's wife, a man I'd never met, but now he was the one who had forced me to face all of this. I felt my throat tighten, the memories of peaceful evenings I'd shared with Grace flashing back in my mind. She shot Tom, right? I asked, my voice dry. Yes, the officer confirmed. She shot him. As for Grace, she was unfortunate enough to be hit by a few bullets. But fortunately, none of them were life-threatening. She should be fine if everything goes as expected. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. My wife, the woman I had once loved, was involved in something like this. Anger surged within me, but all I could feel was an overwhelming emptiness. I wanted more details. I needed to understand everything. But when I thought about Grace, I could only feel hollow inside. One of the officers looked at me and asked, "Did you know about this before it happened?" I looked him straight in the eye, without hesitation. "No." I had no idea, I replied, even though doubt was filling my mind. Why had she kept this from me? Why had she lied to me all this time? How had I been blind to everything? I was too drained to say anything more, but then I blurted out, "I just want to know if she's going to make it." The officer nodded, but I could sense a trace of suspicion in his eyes, as if waiting for me to make a mistake. When I was finally allowed into her room, I almost didn't recognize Grace. She lay there, a woman I once cherished, but now all I saw was a stranger. Her cold, empty stare filled me with an indescribable sense of loneliness. And then, unexpectedly, she spoke. "You're the only one who could save me, but you're also the one who destroyed everything," Grace said, her voice dry, as if she had no more feelings left. I stood there, paralyzed. The words she just spoke hit me like a slap, leaving me stunned. She had turned her back on me, seeking comfort from another man, and now she was blaming me? In the quiet of the hospital room, my anger began to boil. Everything became painfully clear, too clear for me to continue standing there, emotionally detached. She had betrayed me, and now there was nothing I could do to fix it. I stood frozen in the doorway, unable to take my eyes off Grace, the woman I thought would be with me until the end. Now, she lay there, with wounds yet to heal, but still filled with indifference. The words she had just said, words I couldn't forget, echoed in my mind like an accusation. "You don't understand," she continued, her gaze cold as she looked at me. "I had no other choice. You abandoned me for too long." I felt a rush of blood to my head. Her words were like a whip, cutting through what was left of the love I thought we had. But instead of responding with sympathy, I could only stand there in silence, feeling the beat of my own heart, slowly breaking. At that moment, I didn't know what I was feeling. A mix of anger, shame, and pain choked me. She was no longer the woman I had loved. She had destroyed everything we had built, and now she stood before me, accusing and blaming me. "So, what about everything I've done for us?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady, even though my fists were clenched so tight my knuckles were white. "You don't think I tried my best? Didn't I spend all these years here, working tirelessly to provide for this family? Did you even notice?" Grace didn't respond. She turned away, staring at the wounds on her hands as if she were lost in a world I could no longer enter. The feeling of helplessness overwhelmed me, and for the first time in many years, I realized that I couldn't save her. There was nothing left to fix. "Grace," I began, my voice softening, trying to find a way out of the darkness that surrounded us. "We can work this out, can't we? The wounds will heal, and we can start over." She looked at me again, but this time, it wasn't a look of love or forgiveness. It was a cold, almost contemptuous look. "Liam, you don't get it. I don't need you anymore. You can't save me." She turned away, as if she wanted to push me out of her life forever. Her words struck me like a knife to the heart, leaving a scar that would never heal. She no longer saw me as her husband, but as a stranger, a man she had grown weary of, a man she had long left behind. A deep sadness settled in me. We had once shared beautiful moments, days of happiness I thought would last forever. But now, everything had shattered. And now, I had to face the undeniable truth. Grace had betrayed me, and I hadn't seen it coming. I turned away from the hospital room, unable to bear the suffocating atmosphere any longer. I needed to get out. I needed to regain my composure. What I didn't expect was that when I stepped into the hospital corridor, I would come face to face with someone. A man I had never met before, but instantly, I knew who he was: Tom, Grace's lover. He stood there, his face darkened, his eyes red from tension. "Who are you?" I asked, struggling to contain the anger rising in me. Tom looked at me, a hint of shame crossing his face. "I'm the one your wife loved," he said, his words stumbling as if he didn't want to continue the conversation. But I couldn't hold back anymore. "I don't care who you are," I snapped, my voice sharp. "What gives you the right to be in my life and Grace's? Do you think you can just waltz in and tear everything apart with a fling?" Tom remained silent, but his eyes seemed to be waiting for something. A word of forgiveness? A look of sympathy? But I couldn't give him anything, because I knew he was the one who had shattered everything. "You don't understand," Tom said, his voice trembling slightly. "I just loved her. And I didn't want her to get hurt." Tom's words made me choke up. At that moment, I realized that Grace's betrayal wasn't just a slap in the face to me, but also a shock to her. She was suffering too, but she didn't know how to deal with it. Suddenly, everything seemed to slow down. A silent pain consumed me. I had lost Grace, but I had also lost myself in the process. I couldn't save her, and maybe I couldn't even save myself. I turned back to the lawyer's office, not out of patience or a desire to find relief, but because I had no other choice. Sophie Miller, the lawyer I had hired, was the only one who could help me face the difficult decisions ahead. But honestly, I didn't feel ready to face everything. Just a few hours earlier, I had stood in the hospital, witnessing Grace unload all her emotions, all her guilt onto me, blaming me for what she had done. And now, I stood here, preparing for a legal battle that I never wanted. I had been waiting for peace, but instead, I found myself sinking deeper into the fog of betrayal. "Liam," Sophie spoke up when I walked into her office. "I've called one of my colleagues. They'll help you with the legal procedures related to this case. You need to be ready." She didn't look at me sympathetically, but there was a cold, serious expression in her eyes that I couldn't deny. Sophie had no time to guess or show sympathy. She knew I needed to prepare myself mentally if I wanted to get through all of this. "I know this isn't easy, but you need to do what's necessary," Sophie continued, her hands gesturing as if emphasizing something very important. "I've gone through the evidence, and I have to say, Grace is not someone who can just turn her life around immediately. She has chosen her path, and now we have to make sure you're not entangled in something you didn't cause." The weight continued to press down on me as I looked into Sophie's eyes. "I understand," I answered, although inside I felt confused and anxious. "Thank you for helping me." Sophie nodded and continued explaining the next steps in the divorce process. She worked quickly and efficiently, making me feel like I was entering a cycle I couldn't stop. I had listened to Sophie explain everything related to the divorce, about the evidence I needed to clarify Grace's betrayal, about financial arrangements, about my rights. But a part of me still couldn't shake the image of Grace, lying in the hospital with eyes full of disappointment and confusion. Could she change? Could we start over? I asked myself all night, moving from one question to the next, but there was no answer that made me feel at ease. Even if I could forgive, could I live with this pain forever? I wasn't sure. The wounds inside me were so deep they couldn't be healed with just an apology. The next day, I went back to the hospital, but this time not to look into Grace's eyes, but to clarify everything further. Medical documents, legal procedures, and some other details. But when I entered the hospital room, I didn't see Grace alone. Tom was standing there, beside her bed, his eyes empty and full of remorse. The anger surged again inside me, as if I had been slapped in the face once more. Not just because of Grace's betrayal, but because of Tom's presence. The man who had destroyed everything I thought was perfect. "You have no right to be here," I said, my voice firm, not allowing him to offer any excuses. "She's my wife." Tom turned to look at me, but this time his gaze was somewhat helpless. I just wanted to make sure she'll be okay." "Stop lying," I shouted, stepping closer to him. "I don't want to see you here anymore. What have you done to her? What makes you think you can stand between my wife and me?" Tom stood still, offering no resistance, as if he knew that I was the one with the right here. But everything had become too clear. She had chosen him, and now I was the one who had to face the consequences. I walked out of the hospital room, with nothing left to hold on to. Everything was clear. Grace had chosen another path, and now I had to figure out what to do to protect myself in this fight. Our relationship had ended, and I couldn't change that anymore. Exhaustion, pain, and helplessness overwhelmed me. I still loved Grace, but her betrayal had made everything meaningless. I couldn't stay in the shadow of this betrayal any longer. When I walked into the hospital room, the air inside the room suddenly became suffocating and heavy. Grace lay there, on the bed, her face pale from the wounds and anesthesia, but her eyes still couldn't hide the hatred she held for me. I didn't know what to feel, but it didn't matter anymore. She was no longer the wife I once loved. She had changed, and so had I. Entering the room, I tried to control my emotions, but the anger rising within me was like a fire I couldn't put out. Though my heart felt heavy, I still moved toward her bed. Everything now felt like a slow-motion film, with every detail sharp and clear. "Liam," Grace whispered when she saw me, her voice trembling but still filled with determination. "What are you here for? To blame me again?" I felt like I was slapped in the face. After everything that had happened, she still couldn't recognize the pain she had caused me. My heart was bitter, but I couldn't let my weakness take over. I stood there, silent, but my eyes looked at her with all the coldness I could muster. "What have you done to our life, Grace?" I asked, my voice no longer soft. "You didn't just betray me, you made me feel like I never really mattered in your life." Grace lowered her head, not looking at me anymore. A few tears ran down her cheek, but I didn't feel pity. I couldn't. It was too late. "You don't understand. I couldn't live in your shadow forever," she said through her tears, as if trying to explain but not really knowing what to say. "We're no longer us. I need freedom, Liam." I took a deep breath, feeling something clog up in my throat. I had once believed that love could overcome anything. But now, I realized I had lost myself in my own life. The betrayal didn't just break my trust, it tore apart everything left in this relationship. "You think you can find freedom?" I retorted, my eyes filled with anger. "You were already free, Grace. You were free to do whatever you wanted, free to deceive me, free to destroy everything we had." My words were like a sharp knife cutting into her weakness. I could see the regret, the fear, and even the desperation in her eyes. But it was all too late. She was no longer the person I loved, and I was no longer the person she needed. Suddenly, Grace jerked, her eyes widening, as if she realized something very important. "Liam, you can't do this. I still love you. I was wrong, but I can't lose you." That look, that faint voice made my heart tighten. But I couldn't turn back. I couldn't continue living in this cycle of lies and hurt. I couldn't keep enduring this betrayal. All I wanted now was freedom for myself. No, Grace. You've destroyed everything. And I can't go back anymore, I said, trying to hold on to my decision. Grace fell silent, only her soft sigh breaking the stillness in the air. No one said anything else. And in that moment, I realized that this relationship was over. All the memories of our happy days were nothing but ashes now. Everything had changed, and I had to accept that sometimes an ending was necessary. I turned away, not looking back. But as I walked out of the room, I realized I wasn't just walking away from a relationship. I was walking away from a part of myself. A part of me that had died in this process. And whether I liked it or not, I still had to continue living my life. After that encounter, I decided to go through with the divorce. I had no reason to hold on to this relationship anymore. The conversations with my lawyer became quick and emotionless. I knew I was doing the right thing, though my heart still ached. Grace had fought every step of the way, but in the end, she had to face the truth. I didn't love her anymore. And not only that, but I also had to start my life over, rebuilding everything that had been destroyed over the years. The divorce proceedings didn't take long, and when it was over, I didn't feel victorious. I only felt empty. Grace was no longer the person I once loved, and I was no longer the person she needed. But I learned an important lesson. In life, sometimes you have to let go of the things that once meant the most, in order to find yourself again. Betrayal can destroy everything, but it can also be an opportunity to start fresh. And when it's all said and done, I'm left with one thing only: the freedom to live for myself again.